All right, it is 6 p.m. and I will call this meeting of the Lunenburg Town Council to order. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'll also note that we've received regrets from Councillor Birtles, who is at home dealing with an injury, so she will not be joining us this evening. And with that, I will look for a motion to approve our agenda as circulated, moved by Councillor Halverson, seconded by Councillor Sanford. Any discussion or debate, additions, deletions? Deputy Mayor. Deputy Mayor declaring a conflict with 9F, which we will note when we arrive at that point in the agenda. Thank you. Anything else? Nothing. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Takes us on to the meeting minutes of our September 13th meeting. Can I get a motion to approve those as presented? Moved by Councillor Ernst, seconded by Councillor Sanford. Any errors or omissions to note? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. It takes us on to 9A under new business, which is the proposed street services extension policy. There is a staff report and recommendation, and I will turn the floor over to the Director of Community Development to present his report.
Thank you, Your Worship. The department has been working on a service extension policy to help facilitate the extension of public services for development proposals. In consultation with Public Works and the Department of Finance, staff has developed a street service extension policy for council's consideration. The proposal is to have council approve a street service extension policy to identify the approach with regards to the extension of street services and to identify when and how cost-sharing scenarios may be deemed appropriate. The policy deals with the extension of services for the following scenarios. Number one, extension of services for lots created by plan of subdivision on newly created public open streets. Two, extension of services for lots created by subdivision on existing public open streets. Three, extension of services for lots on existing streets reserves that are not public open streets. Four, extension of services for existing lots with no public open street frontage. And five, extension of services for existing lots with street frontage on a public open street with inadequate services. And I have provided a map showing all of those scenarios in the report. The proposed policy outlines where cost sharing of services may be deemed appropriate upon the approval of the town engineer and the means of ensuring the budgetary considerations are considered by council through the following year's budget deliberations. The policy also provides a map of the public open streets, which is included as Schedule A, to help distinguish between the public open streets and the existing road reserves. To encourage developments and to attempt to make servicing arrangements clearer to all involved, it is recommended to approve the street service extension policy. And it's in front of you for consideration at this council.
Thank you, Arthur. I'll open the floor if anybody has any questions or comments. Deputy Mayor. So,
yeah, sorry about that. Arthur, so it would item number 5, would that be relevant to like the situation we had in Archibald Street here maybe about a year or so ago?
sorry, Arthur.
Sorry. We have Article 5 sketch up there for you to review. This was a situation with, I believe the address was 77 Broad Street, and they were requesting the possibility to subdivide the rear lot, which fronts on Tupper, but it doesn't have any water services. So this policy enables us to consider avenues in which we could consider cost sharing upon an application with notice to the applicant that they would have to wait a year before they
Yeah.
receive council's approval, because we don't have that currently in the budget, but we consider it in the following year's budget.
Yeah.
So it really, it enables us to deal with developers and subdividers in a way that's open and transparent.
And for existing systems that may go across private property to get to a public service, is that sort of along that same line?
Yes, that would be number 7. Article 7, which is attachment D. This is an example off of, oh, if you want to go back, yeah. This is an example off of Tannery Road, where there's some lots without any street frontage. But the services are in Tannery Road, which could be serviced by an easement if they were able to get the rights to an easement from the adjacent property owner. And then we would consider using that easement for the means of access to the town's sewer and water services within the street right away.
Okay, so but if you're on an existing street, like I'll use Archibald as an example because I think that was a good one. So we had there was no system on Archibald Street, so their systems went through private property to get to Brook. So then we actually put the service in on Archibald Street, and I think that's warranted to be shared, and it's probably other situations in that when it comes time to improve their line or dig up their line, right? That sort of thing. Is that reflected in any of these here?
Well, these are basically to help out with future and new development proposals. So it's dealing with new developments. It's not to upgrade existing sewer and water services in the existing road.
Okay.
It's to expand the services so that we can encourage development where development would otherwise not be permitted due to the lack of services.
I understand. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
All right, I'm next. I've got a few. The first thing is that we've got 2 policies tonight that have slightly different formats. So I'll look to the CEO and say, when we get to our general review, we might want to look at having a uniform format or relatively uniform format for policy items. With respect to this policy in particular, I think it's a very well thought out policy. I have 2 comments that I'm concerned about right now. First of which is with respect to sections 5.4, 6.2, and 8.4, which talk about council's ability at their discretion to, on a case-by-case basis, cost share things that have a clear benefit. And my worry is just that language is too vague, that it's going to lead to a lot of requests that, council's going to wind up grappling with without anything, by way of evaluation criteria when requests come forward. And I'm thinking particularly something comparable to, section or policy 619 in the municipal planning strategy, which lays out general evaluation criteria for development agreements and land use bylaw amendments, that kind of thing. I just think that it would be helpful here, because otherwise what we wind up doing a lot is writing policy, and then the policy says, oh, well, council can decide whatever at its discretion. And then we wind up defeating the purpose for having the policy because things keep coming to council. I understand that in certain instances under this policy, that would be advisable and necessary. I just think it would be good to have criteria that guide us when they do. I'm just wondering if you can respond to that, Arthur.
I guess when I drafted the proposed policy, I didn't want to make it too restrictive to either tie the applicant's hand or council's hands in order to review a particular application. I felt that as long as council thought there was a clear benefit to the community, it's their own judgment as to what that would be, and would be able to proceed on that basis alone. But I can certainly understand your comments with regards to a criteria-based review would certainly help council determine what that clear benefit is, but it might be difficult to actually draft something of that nature in this particular case, but we can certainly look at, you know, the criteria that's built into the MPS and try to adapt that into this policy.
Yeah, and I wasn't suggesting that we do that. I was just using that as an example of something where council would have to decide something on a case-by-case basis, but where there are evaluation criteria established. I think this would need a separate set of evaluation criteria for when those kinds of requests came forward, what we would be looking for. I mean, you can imagine, like we would be shelling out for service extensions. So I can imagine things like, does it create housing? What tax base does it create? You know, what's the payoff period? Things like that. You know, what's our own budgetary capacity? Just so that when staff are bringing these requests to the council table, that they've been run through a set of criteria that basically would weed out any applications that wouldn't be, you know, well considered. And then the second thing I had was the budget year and aligning it with the budget cycle. And I understand the reason for that, but I worry that that'll potentially delay things. So I just wanted to know what the argument was for, you know, having that as opposed to, say, trying to build up a servicing reserve that could be dealt with on a case-by-case basis.
I think in the past, when dealing with year-to-year budgets, it's quite difficult to try to have that cushion built into the tax rate and the impact on citizens, particularly without knowing whether or not that money was going to be actually spent in that fiscal year or not. If I may, I'd like to turn that over to Lisa for any comments that she may have.
Certainly, I guess when the policy was being drafted, it was considered, you know, the budgets would already be set, and making those mid-year or on the fly adjustments are not always easy. And that was why it was considered for the following year. It would take us some time to build up that reserve, and we would need to have some flexibility while we were working on that. But that could be an option, yes, if council wanted to consider that.
Yeah, and it was more just wondering, you know, I understand our fiscal constraints. But it was just, say we get a request mid-year because a permit goes in, and then we're delaying the request that could have clear public benefit, you know, rather than if we had once we potentially would have a servicing reserve built, that we could say, okay, you know, you could come to council with a request. This is in the servicing reserve, you know, you get what I'm driving at. So I'm fine with that part. I'm fine with approving that part as is for now. I think that we should potentially look to try and build a servicing reserve in the future, and then maybe amend the policy. But I would like to see criteria. I find it defeats the purpose of having policy when we just talk about council's discretion, case by case basis. Then everybody's going to want an exemption to the policy, and it's going to wind up being here over and over again. I have Councillor Halverson next.
Just said everything I was going to say. So that was fine. I'll just reiterate, that's my fear is exactly what the mayor pointed out, is I would like to see some kind of evaluation criteria. I guess we don't need to have, quite frankly, we look to staff as the experts on this. We're going to look for advice anyway. So if there is some kind of formatting where we can do an evaluation, you know, it scores X, whatever it is, then yes, it's determined to be of value and we'll go ahead. Again, same fear. I've watched previous councils wrestle with this, and, you know, it becomes cumbersome. It drags on, and it really services no one. I think it'd be better for us, for the developers, for the residents, if we had very clear laid out criteria.
Thank you, Councillor Halverson.
CAO is trying to get your attention.
I have the CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm going to address not only this comment, but probably your next one and the next policy as well. And I don't disagree with the criteria for evaluation. The problem, I guess the issue remains a lot of our bylaws that would support or I guess reinforce some of these policies, they're not aligning. So as we're going through and doing this bylaw and policy review, one thing I've noticed is that the municipal clerk or manager bylaw, it was drafted in 1989, and had one update in 91. So there's a lot of sections in that bylaw that would even preclude me from making decisions like this rather than have these small minutia ones in council's chamber. So what I've done is taken liberty of taking a stab at redrafting a CAO bylaw to allow council to be more progressive and certainly make the organization much more nimble. So as we go through that and through these policies, we'll certainly need to align them all so that they're consistent in formatting and nomenclature as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, CAO. Any further comments at this stage? So my sense is, so the motion is there if anybody wants to move and second it, but my sense is that we're willing to defer this so that staff can go back and perhaps draft some criteria against which particular applications would be assessed. Is that the will of council? We tacit consentire. Okay, so we will defer that, and that takes us on to the land divestiture policy. And there's a staff report and recommendation. I will give it to the Community Development Director to present his report.
Thank you, Your Worship. The department has been working on a proposed land divestiture policy to help facilitate the disposal of land surplus, town surplus lands in keeping with the Municipal Government Act. In consultation with the town's management team, staff has developed a land divestiture policy for council's consideration and approval. In keeping with the town's CCP, a public engagement process has been outlined in Part 7 of the policy. This would require the town to undertake a public information meeting for the sale of any surplus residential use lands as defined under the town's land use bylaw. Any sales of any lands not zoned residential, the requirement to hold a public information meeting will be at the discretion of the CAO. The policy requires a staff report to be filed with council prior to declaring land as surplus. As outlined in the policy, a staff report will include items as identified in Appendix A, which is outlined in the land profile evaluation tool. To enable the sale of surplus lands, town lands, in a coherent fashion, it is recommended to approve the land divestiture policy. The policy has been reviewed by the town's management team and is in compliance with the MGA and the town's CCP. So I'll leave that for council's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. I have Councillor Halverson.
Gotta get all my points in before you do this time. So, thank you. Thank you, Arthur, for this. My only question really on this one, I guess further to very similar to what we talked about last time, but my question on this one is how many properties do we actually talk about here when we're talking about the CAO discretion? Do we have a sense of, just so we can explain for the benefit of the public when we say it's not residential, what kind of properties are we talking about and how many would the CAO have discretion over that would not have to go to a public meeting if each chose not to?
To be honest, we haven't reviewed that. So
Is it possible to get I guess maybe just an idea of what kind of buildings we'd be talking about then, and where it's not residential, what kind of properties would we be talking about? Things like the blue building, the public works building? What are we talking about here?
Well, right at the moment, we're dealing with Upper Hall Street. We're dealing with lands at 25 Midway Street, zone institutional. There's land on Callback Street that's zone institutional that we're dealing with. So there's certainly a few that would fall under that category. The thought being is that in most instances, we're selling land for development and for additional tax revenue year after year after year. That's our intent, I believe. Some of these lands are just not developable. Some of the lands are just service leased areas where properties have been leasing land for really minor amounts that are costing the town more just in the administration costs. So council knows that we're dealing with quite a few of those as well. So there's some of those out there that are both zone residential and some are not zone residential. So, but the intent was that for residential properties, the potential for any impacts on adjacent property owners is in those residential areas. Like people know where the industrial lands are and they anticipate at some point industrial developments will occur on those lands. Where residential lands, if we do sell them adjacent to low density residential areas that are one level single family homes, that we should give them the opportunity to voice any concerns they may have through a public information meeting. So that's where the thought process came from, that we should at least allow them to come and make their comments known to council prior to the sale of any lands that are zoned for residential purposes.
I appreciate the clarification. It was more for, yes, it's not that I have any issues with your justification there, or, you know, any questions about the competency of our CAO, but, you know, just maybe for peace of mind, just so the residents understand that, you know, we're not trying to sell, you know, a house out from underneath somebody for some other purpose anyway, without any consultation. So, okay, thank you very much. Appreciate explaining that.
All right, I've got myself and then Councillor Sanford. So for this one, I just have a few comments, particularly specific to the profile evaluation tool. I think it's pretty well thought out, but there are a couple things that I worry it's a little one-sided, in the sense that it's looking at all the things that would potentially make disposal objectionable, which it should. But at the same time, like things like economizing the asset portfolio, or what the carrying costs current and future for a lot of these assets are, which is what's driving the impetus to, you know, rationalize the portfolio. I just think it would be good, because I can imagine, Arthur, that as these disposals come forward, that these are the kinds of things that are going to wind up in a staff report for information purposes. And I know that council's well seized of them because we see the budgets, but I just think for the public, you know, it would be worthwhile to see how much these things are costing, right? So that there's a full picture of why we're looking at disposals, including, you know, surplus use to the municipality, but also the carrying costs, which are significant. And then, you know, things like, I'm looking at 5 and 6 here, you know, does the property have any architectural, historical, or recreational value, which is a wholly legitimate concern, or does it have any ecological or conservation value? Again, a wholly legitimate concern, but I think we should be asking ourselves as well, you know, is the town owning that necessary to preserve those values? If that makes sense, because then do you get what I'm driving at? That, you know, I'm worried that this will make pictures look more negative in terms of disposal of assets than they generally are.
I think it would really depend on the drafter of the report with regards to filling in their criteria comments with regards to those. You have made a lot of good points. I really like the one that you mentioned earlier about carrying costs associated with not proceeding with the sale of the property. And maybe we could add that as number 14 if council agrees, if we're able to then proceed with the policy on that basis.
Yeah, so that would be up to council. Then there's just one small stylistic one where the CAO, where it continually says the CAO at the CAO discretion. I don't know why we wouldn't just write there. I mean, it does seem kind of confusing to me if I were a layman reading that, but it's not a big deal one way or the other. I have Councillor Sanford next.
Just want to say thank you for all the work that you've done with this, Arthur. Starting is always the hardest part. It's always easier to give feedback after the fact, right? When I'm looking at the public information meeting and similar concerns to Councillor Halverson, I'm thinking about public information meetings as the opportunity to advise the public, but also the opportunity for the public for us to be able to get comments from the public. So I value that process, and I feel as counselors, you know, that's a part of our role is representing the people. So when we're looking at divesting in any of the town lands, and in order to facilitate informed decision-making by council, I think it would be in our best interest if we did have public information meetings in those 7.2, when we're talking about divesting those that are not residential zoned. I think it should be encompassing for all town-owned lands. I think it's in our best interest to hear from the public and to inform the public. Thank you.
The only thing I'd offer, and I'd welcome staff's comment on this, I understand the intent, and I think for all sort of major pieces, we would want to look at that. A lot of these are slivers of abutting properties, right? And I worry that it would generate a significant staff workload if we had to, if you write in a policy that you have to do it for every piece of land, then if you sell, you know, a minor piece of land to an abutting property owner, you'd have to do that. So I'm just wondering if staff can comment on that. And if it gets into debate, then we'll put the motion on the floor and deal with it then.
First, I'd like to mention that this was a team effort from the economic development officer to our planning tech to myself and through finance as well as public works. So it was a total team effort in the development of the policy. And I thank everyone for their help. I tried to draft this in light of how council has been dealing with divestiture of some of the properties in the past. We actually, as you know, the second fact sheet for Upper King Street was just released, I believe today or yesterday. And so I was trying to follow along those fact sheets, which we previously noted, like on several properties, that we did not inform the public, like the Angus Walters house. And that house was zoned, you know, institutional under the old plan. Now it's commercial, general commercial, I believe. Or 17 Tannery Road, we're also dealing with. So I was trying to reflect our current standards in that regard. So that's pretty much all I can say on that.
And Councillor Sanford.
Thank you. I know that we've been working to develop a policy to avoid exactly the practices that we've been just coming through. So we've been trying to move things forward without a policy while the policy was being developed so that we can get the policy right and then use the policy to go forward. And again, I hope that the public consultation part, public information part, and where we're collecting feedback from the public is integrated into the policy as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. So Councillor Halverson.
I guess just to follow up on what we've been talking about here, you know, as council, we're trying not to be micromanaging things. It's the last thing we want. We want to set policy and let staff do their work. So I guess in the spirit of that, and to follow up what Councillor Sanford is saying, is it possible that there would be some kind of guidance provided to the CAO or some standard where we could say, you know, if a property is abutting and is under such and such a side, or that this would not need to go to public consultation, or if it exceeds this, or if it's a standalone, you know, this should go to public. And again, I'm totally relying on your expertise here. I don't want to create a workload that would be unmanageable for staff. I'm just wondering, is it possible that policy could be formed in some way that is easily understood by the public and by us and by the CAO for, you know, when that discretion should take place?
So I'm wondering if similar to the previous policy, we think it's just easier to give staff the next 2 weeks or so, or until a future meeting to come back with a revised version based on the comments that we've offered.
I think before we do that, I wouldn't mind hearing from Arthur because if it's not something that is feasible, then I'd rather just like take this policy and we could probably vote on it tonight. I don't think we need to walk away from it because I think it's, to Councillor Sanford's point, I think it's a great piece of work and I commend staff on the effort that they put into it. I think it's fantastic, but just those little tweaks that we could get hopefully for clarification.
Through your worship, by all means, we can further develop criteria with regards to which properties should go through a PIM and which ones shouldn't. Even between our first notice of approving the policy and today, I looked at section 51A of the MGA again. Those deals with those properties immediately abutting property owners, and in that case, we're able to sell under fair market value pursuant to the MGA. But in those circumstances, personally, I don't see any need for a public information meeting, just as an example. And we could actually build that into the policy and bring it back for council to consider it at the next meeting.
Okay, is everyone okay with that? I have the deputy mayor.
Thanks, your worship. Yeah, I think this is one of those things where you end up going down rabbit holes when you start looking at it, and it's a very thorough. And I think, Arthur, maybe it's because you're trying to cover everything that we've probably touched on over the years. Well, I'll go back to 2012, and during that was my first time on council, and in that election, it was the public was angered and upset about all the public buildings that we owned. And so anyway, then we got on council, and the excuses were always, well, we store that in here and we put this stuff in. There was always a use for it. But I think the bottom line is use versus relevance. So, it's kind of like if a building's costing you more than the relevance that is that the use you're getting out of it, we should be disposed of. And I think that's where we're at here now. And that's why we have this push on. So, I don't think it's overcomplicated. I think, like you said, little slivers of land where, budding owners are willing to buy that just cleans up our slate, and it's very easy to do, right? And I don't see where it'd be any public consultation on that. Maybe something a little larger, or maybe a little more, even if it touches the public use, it would be something that you'd consult on, right? But a building that you're just storing junk in, which we have a tendency to do as Lunenburgers. We don't like throwing things away. I don't know if that's relevant of, have a public hearing relevant to that, right? This sort of thing. So anyway, that's just sort of like, to guide you, it will be impossible for you to probably tick off every known thing that's going to come up. So,
Why did you look at Councillor Ernst when you said that? So it is anyone's right at this stage, and there is a draft motion provided to move or second that motion. But in the absence of anybody doing that, I think we'll give staff one more crack at it and pass it at the meeting they bring it back to. Okay, so we will consider that deferred by unanimous consent. That takes us on to item C, the Fire Hall Vehicle Exhaust Extraction System RFP Award. There is a staff report and recommendations for that, and I will turn it over to the relevant staffer to provide that report.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is just a follow-up report to Council's July 12th motion regarding this capital project. At the time, it was requested to see if the vendor could hold the price to the end of September, so to give the district time for their next meeting to see if they were able to consider a 50% contribution to the project. So the price has been held. The district has agreed to do the cost sharing, and unfortunately, staff did some research, still weren't able to find any grants that would support it. But if council does want to proceed with the project, we would need a motion to support increasing the budget and a motion to award the project because it's over $100,000. They're both draft motions of that in the report for your consideration.
Okay, there are two motions there. It's anybody's pleasure to move them. Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Sanford. Is there any discussion, debate, comments, or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. It takes us on to wastewater and water treatment quality information reports, April to June 2022. And I see that the Director of Engineering is here with us, so I will turn the floor over to him.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll start with the wastewater quality report for the April to June quarter. Nova Scotia Environment Approval documents to operate the wastewater treatment plant require that certain tests be carried out to verify the quality of treated wastewater at the plant. There are also federal testing standards to be followed. Routine testing is conducted both by the town at the plant and also by independently accredited labs to determine compliance levels with both sets of standards. This staff report provides a summary of these test results for the April to June period. Approval to operate was amended by NSE in 2020. The requirements of the approval, as well as the federal requirements, are summarized on page 2 of the staff report. The required number of tests per month for the criteria were conducted, and all pH tests were within the required ranges. During this period, there were 2 instances of total suspended solids within the samples being above the acceptable level. Nonetheless, on a quarterly average basis, our results met all provincial and federal requirements. Regarding lethality testing, we're now only required to test for acute lethality yearly because of the last 5 consecutive samples passing this testing requirement. So the next test for lethality is due in November 2022. And there's also a chart within the report on page 3 showing the average monthly daily flow of wastewater relative to precipitation, where we have the combined plant. That's it relating to the wastewater report.
Thank you, Tyson. Are there any questions at this stage? Councillor Halverson.
I find it's funny to have acute lethality. I just figured any lethality is usually deemed acute. But actually, I don't mean to put you on the spot here. Thank you for this. I don't actually have questions pertaining to this, but I would like to ask, in light of the hurricane we've just gone through and the work that just took place with the new berm over at the wastewater treatment plant, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on how that helped, or what was there a benefit that we saw from that berm on the hurricane.
Through the chair, it definitely helped staff's peace of mind leading up to the event between both the berm and the 6-inch pump. It meant that we didn't have to put the plug in the culvert that sort of runs under Kissing Bridge Road, the berm, and which allows the water to get away as well as keep it out. The performance during the storm, where high tide was around 7:30 on Friday night, probably before the heavier rain started, and then the rain sort of eased off at 6 p.m. and high tide was at 8:04. So I was on top of that berm both those times, and very pleased that I didn't need a life raft. But the performance in that storm was excellent. I think we had more factors helping us maybe than we did in some other storms. But that doesn't mean that I'm sure there'll be a time when the berm gets tested more severely. But its performance in this particular storm, very pleasing.
Also an opportune moment to thank staff for their after hours work on the weekend in terms of hurricane preparation and emergency management. Any further questions? No? Okay, that takes us on to item 9E, which is a special event application for the South Shore Mutual Aid Parade, which is hopefully one of those items that will be in a CAO bylaw at a future date. I will look for a motion to approve that request as circulated, moved by Councillor Sanford, seconded by Councillor Ernst. Discussion, debate, comments, questions, Councillor Halverson.
I would like to make a comment about this. This is an event that goes completely under the radar at every opportunity, every year. These people, I feel very strongly about the fact that we have this wonderful agreement between so many fire services who come together and protect this entire county. And they come out one time a year. They always pick a town. They've been here now in Lunenburg a couple of times. This is second or third time. And nobody knows about it, and I really do feel, I guess I'm turning to staff or our CAO. Is there some way, I'm presuming we're going to approve this, that the town can show its support and be more encouraging and perhaps do something to promote this event, the fact that they're holding this parade, and let people know and get them out to help support and show their appreciation to our firefighters.
CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through the chair to Councillor Halverson. We can certainly use all of our social media platforms as well as our website to start to put the word out of this. This will be my first one, of course, but I do share a special place in my heart for those first responders and everything they do. So I think it'd be worthwhile of our time and effort to push this forward as best we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Halverson. Any further questions, comments, discussion, debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, the motion is carried. I will note the Deputy Mayor, having previously declared a conflict, will now vacate his seat and sit in the gallery. We have a Lunenburg Curling Club, Lunenburg Athletic Facility Fund application in the amount of 500.
I was looking to see where you store your mustache.
$550 for sprinkler upgrades. It's hard enough to tell you two apart. I will look for a motion to approve that request, moved by Councillor Ernst, seconded by Councillor Sanford. Any questions, comments, discussion, debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, the motion is carried. And the Deputy Mayor may dutifully resume his seat, no longer being in a conflict. Now I need a motion to meet in camera to consider items pursuant to Section 22(2) of the Municipal Government Act. Moved by Councillor Duggan, seconded by Councillor Sanford. All those in favor? Opposed, the motion is carried. And with council's unanimous consent, we will reconvene at 6:50 as council in camera.